sister, you've been on my mind. Sister, we're two of a kind. Sister, I'm keeping my eye on you.
Hello. Every voice tells a story, and every story holds power. This is Voices Against Violence, a podcast from NGO CSW New York, and I am Pamela Morgan, who, along with Ivy Cook, serves as co-chair of the substantive NGO Committee. In this series, you'll hear the lived experiences of women who've endured, survived, and resisted gender-based violence. Women who are now leading efforts to heal communities, change laws, and reclaim their power. These voices come from every corner of the globe. Their courage transcends borders. Their fight is ours. Grounded in truth, informed by experience, powered by global voices, because silence has never been an option, and change starts with listening. Gender-based violence is not confined to one region, one culture, or one system. It's a global crisis with deeply local consequences. Data from UN Women shows that an estimated 736 million women, almost 1 in 3, has been subjected to physical and/or sexual intimate partner violence, non-partner sexual violence, or both at least once in their lifetime. And that's 30% of women aged 15 and older. This figure does not include sexual harassment. Women who have experienced sexual violence are more likely to suffer from depression, anxiety disorders, unplanned pregnancies, sexually transmitted infections, and HIV, with long-lasting consequences. Most violence against women is committed by current or former husbands or intimate partners. More than 640 million women ages 15 and older, 26%, have been subjected to intimate partner violence. In 2023, around 51,100 women and girls worldwide were killed by intimate partners or other family members. This means that on average, 140 women and girls are killed every day by someone in their own family. While 60% of all female homicides are committed by intimate partners or other family members, only 12% of all male homicides are perpetrated in the private sphere. Today, we have with us German human rights activist, columnist, and author Romy Stangl, who is going to talk about her work in combating the global scourge of violence against women. Romy is committed to setting a sign of hope in the fight against injustice and violence that women around the world experience every day. Enabling women to live self-determined lives in freedom and security is what drives her. She is a board member of 1 Billion Rising Munich and is committed to women's rights worldwide. She launched the Signs of Hope Project for victims of domestic violence and was a co-initiator of the anti-violence prevention program, the Peacemakers. She also volunteers to support women affected by domestic violence on their journey out of this situation. She is an Equal Opportunities Office in the City Administration of Haar, Germany. With her 2023 petition for the appointment of counsels for victims of domestic violence at the state and federal levels, she committed to effectively incorporating the perspectives of survivors of domestic violence into the political process, legislation, the implementation of the Istanbul Convention, and into protection, support, and prevention structures. Welcome, Romy.
Hello.
Thank you. Can you tell us how you first became involved in this work, and what are some of the specific challenges women in your community face when confronting gender-based violence?
At first, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for the invitation to the podcast and the opportunity to talk about domestic violence against women in all its diversity. and about my personal activist and political way of fighting it. Thank you so much. My commitment arose from my own experience. I'm a survivor of gender-based violence in childhood, adolescence, and as an adult. I was 7 when my father hit me for the first time. At 14, my brother almost beat me to death. And as a young mother, I found myself in a relationship in which violence was once again part of everyday life, sexualized and played out. Very early on, the violence doesn't just hurt, it makes you small, mute, and invisible. The turning point came in a moment I will never forget. The turning point came when my son was 4 years old. After a brutal punch, my face was marked. His kindergarten teacher saw the hematoma and took action. She took us to a women's shelter. I still remember the journey very clearly. My son asked quietly, "Mom, where we are going?" And I didn't know myself. From one moment to the next, I had nothing. No home, no job, no income, no prospects. But for the first time, I had a feeling that I was no longer alone. This woman saved us. And above all, she showed me that we need people who won't look away. And above all, that was our saving step to safety, but also the beginning of a long, arduous journey. As much support as I received at the Women's Refuge, I also had to experience how our system can let women down. My complaint of domestic violence was eventually dropped due to a lack of evidence. They didn't believe me. I never went to the doctor to have my injuries documented because I didn't know how important it was. My tormentor went unpunished and still walks around unchallenged today. Even worse, my child was taken away from me. The family court awarded my ex-partner the right of residence for our son, even though he was the perpetrator. In 2018, I stood on a stage at Marienplatz in Munich at 1 billion Rising and spoke publicly about my story for the first time. That was the moment I regained my voice. Since then, I've been fighting for other victims of domestic violence, for structural change, for justice. 1 billion Rising Munich is part of the world's largest movement against gender-based violence. Every year, on February 14th, we organize a large protest action with dance, music, speeches, and a clear stance. Dance, rise, resist. But our efforts do not end here. Our goal is to do more. Together with our established network, we are bringing the topic of violence against women and girls in all its diversity into the center of society in a variety of ways in order to tackle the taboo that still exists. We cooperate with theater groups, cinemas, journalists, aid organizations, associations, institutions, youth work organizations, Munich City politicians, and the Bavarian State Ministry for Family, Labor and Social Affairs. We provide information about violence in the social environment and about help and advice services, and thus create low-threshold ways out of violence. In doing so, we specifically promote awareness, civil courage, and prevention. Our monthly free Zoom calls are a special format in which we give organizations, associations, and institutions from all over Germany a stage. They all campaign for equality and against violence against girls and women in all its diversity. These online meetings are open to everyone, including people who are not directly affected, because only those who are informed can help others. One of our most important goals is broad nationwide networking in order to reach as many people as possible. Education, prevention, and work with perpetrators are essential to end gender-based violence, and we need everyone to do this. We are committed to this with all our strength. Our biggest public relations project is our annual campaign, Violence Doesn't Come in a Bag, which we run every year on November 25th, the International Day Against Violence Against Women, together with the Munich, Landsberg and Erding Bakers Guild. In over 200 bakery branches in and around Munich, 250,000 bread bags with emergency numbers and informations on help services are handed out over the bakery counters. This campaign brings the topic into the heart of everyday life, where people don't expect it. It raises awareness and shows violence is not a marginal issue, it concerns us all. We should extend a hand to those affected by domestic violence to show that they are not alone. But it's not enough to raise awareness. We need to change structures. That's why I launched a petition in fall 2023 calling for the establishment of a nationwide council of victims of domestic violence at state and federal level in Germany. Why? Because decisions on protection, laws and help have so far been made without the voices of those affected by domestic violence. This must change. So far, laws, measures and structures to combat domestic violence have mostly been developed without the direct involvement of those affected by domestic violence. Yet it is precisely these people who know where the system is failing. Those who have experienced violence know the gaps and how they can be closed. Those affected should not only be heard, they should have a say. It is about a participation at eye level, about expertise through experience, about structural change from within. So much for my why and how I get involved. And thank you for your follow-up question. What are some of the specific challenges women in my community face when confronting gender-based violence? This is a very central question because women are affected by gender-based violence in Germany are not only fighting against the violence itself, but also against the system, a policy that often leaves them alone. I see this in my daily work, what specific challenges women in our community face when confronting gender-based violence. The first big hurdle is shame. Many women think it's their own fault because they stayed too long, because they didn't fight back, because they are blamed for the injustice they suffered. Because society asks, why did you let them do this to you? But no one asks, why did he do this to her? The blame clearly lies with the perpetrator, I think, and with the structures that protect him. Shame is still in the wrong place. It doesn't belong to the women who experience domestic violence. It belongs to the perpetrators. And it belongs to the structures that enable violence. Shame must change sides, to use the words of Giselle Pellicot. The statistical numbers in Germany from 2023, they speak a clear language. 938 women and girls were victims of femicide. That is one femicide almost every day. 52,030 victims of sexual offenses, over half of them minors. 70,193 cases of digital violence, an increase of 25% on the previous year. 180,715 women were victims of domestic violence, an increase of 5.6% on the previous year. And children are almost always affected. They grow up with fear, with powerlessness. And yet the family court often forces them to have contact with a violent parent. This systemic violence against children is a blind spot that we urgently need to address. Another massive problem is the lack of shelters. Germany lacks 14,000 places in women's shelters. That means a huge number of women are turned away despite being in danger because there's simply no space. And many survivors experience disappointment and re-traumatization within the justice system in Germany. I myself have seen charges dropped, how the violence was played down, how the court granted the father the right of residence for my child, even though he was the perpetrator. Reports are dismissed, violence is relativized, perpetrators are granted access or custody rights for the children, who are often also affected or remain unpunished. Trust in the justice system is dwindling, and rightly so. And last but not least, there are structural hurdles. Women with a history of migration, with disabilities, without secure resident status, they often experience double discrimination. They have less access to help, less information, and are more afraid of the legal consequences. Here too, specific services, culturally sensitive advice, and reliable language mediation are needed. We have been fighting for this for a long time, and finally an important milestone has been reached in the German Parliament in 2024, the Violence Assistance Act. It's due to come into force in 2032. This law guarantees all victims of gender-based violence, regardless of their origin, income, or situation, a legal right to protection and help. This is a huge step forward. It obliges the federal and state governments to provide nationwide funding for shelters, to secure advice centers, and to make services barrier-free and culturally sensitive. In short, it makes protection a state obligation, not a voluntary service. And that is exactly right. But there is still a long way to go before 2032, and that is precisely why we must remain vigilant now, because a law is only as good as its implementations. It must not fail because of money, responsibilities, or bureaucracy. What we need is justice. We need protection, clear laws, nationwide funding for women's shelters, mandatory perpetrator intervention work, prevention and education programs that start with young people. And we need a society that stops being silent. We need a society that says to those affected, we see you, we believe in you, and we walk with you. That is what I fight for.
Romy, thank you so much for that comprehensive response. Your call for laws, funding, education, intervention programs, and for a receptive society that believes in fairness and justice for women is really heart-touching and so badly needed. So my final question to you is, what supports do local movements need from the international community, and what should be done to protect women from domestic violence? So we're really asking you for a call to action. We want you to leave our listeners with what you believe to be next steps.
Okay, thank you for this question, Pamela. Local movements need the international community on their side, not just symbolically, but as a concrete, reliable partner in the fight against domestic violence. I say this both as a survivor, as an activist. The structures we are fighting against are deeply rooted, patriarchal, violent, often protected by silence. They do not stop in national borders. That is why our response must also transcend borders, because violence against women is a global human rights problem, and the international responsibility is just as great as the local one. In Germany and Europe, we are seeing despite the existence of human rights agreements such as the Istanbul Convention and the UN Sustainable Development Goals, so especially the goal 5.2, end violence against women, implementation is often lagging behind. Although the Istanbul Convention has been in force in Germany since 2018, the latest review report makes it clear that Germany is not fulfilling the requirements sufficiently. There's a lack of funding, commitment, and political will. What we need at local level are three things, I think. Reliability, networking, reinforcement, professional networks, and capacity building. Wrong word, sorry. My emotions go over me. reliability means that the international community must exert pressure so that states not only ratify but also deliver. It is not enough to sign symbolic agreements. We need mandatory monitoring systems, clear standards, reliable funding and sanctions in the event of non-compliance. The EU took an important step by joining the Istanbul Convention in June 2023, but 6 member states have still not ratified the agreement. A clear stance is needed here and international consequences. We need political backing. If states like some in the EU are at the moment start to roll back protective laws or want to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention, there must be consequences. The international community is called upon to draw clear red lines here. Human rights, and this includes protection from violence, are non-negotiable. The international community must keep up the pressure. Also on states such as Poland or Turkey, which are actively withdrawing from responsibility. For me, networking means that local initiatives need a platform to talk to other movements, decision makers and experts across borders, because many problems such as inadequate victim protection, a lack of data, or discriminatory court practices are similar in many countries. When we learn from each other, we gain strength. We need uniform standards. Whether a woman receives help in Munich, Madrid, or Warsaw should not depend on chance. Local movements need international exchange through best practice models, common data standards, and uniform terms such as femicide, because only what is clearly named can also be combated. Standardized definitions for domestic violence and binding protection mechanism at European level are essential for effective cross-border victims protection. The EU could coordinate much more closely here and make national governments accountable. And finally, reinforcement. Many local organizations work with minimal resources, often on voluntary basis, at the limit, and achieve great things in the process, from public relations and prevention to crisis intervention. What we need are direct funding structures, for example, through EU projects, international funds, or global partnerships. I would like to see a European action plan to strengthen local movements financially and structurally, not as a side note, but as a central element of feminist foreign and domestic policy. Professional networks and capacity building are also needed. Organizations such as WAVE have been working against violence against women throughout Europe for almost 30 years. They needed expansion and financial support to enable further training, research, and transnational specialist conferences. Police social workers, judicial staff, teachers, educators, they all need to be internationally networked and trained so that standards such as trauma-sensitive procedure and victim protection become a matter of course, but should be done to protect women from domestic violence. Expansion and secure funding for women's refugees and shelters. All professional groups with contacts to victims, police, teachers, educators, social workers, and medical staff need mandatory training on the dynamic of domestic violence and trauma-sensitive approaches. Mandatory, not voluntary. Sensitizations must not be a voluntary option, must be a part of the basic professional qualification. We need clear legal definitions of femicide and domestic violence, standardized throughout Europe and all over the world. Seamless data collection, because what is not counted does not count. Prevention in schools, the media, and the public in order to break through stereotypical role models. Expansion and funding of perpetrator interventions. And for me, it's important the following goals must also be realized in all European countries. Adopt and enforce national laws to address and punish all forms of violence against women and girls. Adopt and implement a multi-sectoral action plan. Improve data collection on the prevalence of violence against women and girls, raise public awareness, and improve social mobilization. The 1 Billion Rising movement at the finish all over the world reminds us 1 billion women worldwide experience violence in their lifetime, but just as many are standing up. On February 14th, we will dance and demonstrate in over 190 countries against silence, against impunity, against looking the other way. This global wave of solidarity gives us strength, but it also needs political backing, resources, and space. And my call to action: if we really want to end domestic violence, we must no longer think in terms of responsibility, but in terms of our accountability. And this responsibility lies with all of us, locally, nationally, and internationally. The international community must understand local movements are the driving force in the fight against violence, but they cannot lead it alone. It needs real solidarity at eye level. Change does not only begin in parliaments, it starts with the women affected who dares to talk about the violence she has experienced. And she needs a system that listens to her and acts. And at least my appeal to civil society: listen, get involved, stand up. Silence protects the perpetrators. We need you as witnesses, as allies, as voices of solidarity. And to all those affected, you are not alone, you are not to blame. I dream of a society in which violence is not trivialized but prevented, where children do not grow up with fear, where women don't have to flee in order to survive. And I know that this dream is not an ideal, it is a human right. Let's make this reality together, with attitude, with heart, with political courage. Because now it's time to act, not sometimes, now.
Thank you so much, Romy, for that passionate call to action. And I agree with you. Violence is protected by silence, and the importance of raising local voices of victims in order to resist. Thank you again for sharing your important insights on solutions to helping victims of domestic violence. Thank you so much. So as we've heard, change begins at the grassroots, but it doesn't end there. From rural towns to the UN halls in New York, the fight against gender-based violence is being driven by people like Romy Stangl, with courage, clarity, and conviction. You can learn more about Romy's work by visiting the website www.onebillionrising.org. It's www.onebillionrising.org. Thank you for joining us in Voices Against Violence, a podcast by NGO CSW New York. If today's story moved you, please share it, start a conversation, and stay connected with us at ngocsw.org. Because raising voices is just the beginning. Listening and learning is where change begins. Thank you very much.